Welcome to the Time Capsule Show, where we explore life in the 21st century through the eyes of people just like you and me. I'm Joerenz.
And I'm Monica.
And today we have host and creator of the fantastic cooking channel, Tastinghistory, Max Miller. Welcome to the show, Max.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're so glad to have you on.
Yeah, I'm such a history lover, so just having someone who makes food, combining with history, that's so amazing.
It's, I think they go together well. So obviously, it's what I do. So.
So can you tell us a little more about what you do? How did you get into your YouTube profession?
So I kind of got into it from a friend that I used to work with suggested I do it. So I used to work at Disney, Walt Disney Studios, the movie studio, and I would bring in food, baked goods mostly, and I would talk about the history around them and give little mini lectures to my coworkers. And last was, I guess, 2 Christmases ago, back in 2019, one of my coworkers said, you should put this up on YouTube. People would maybe think it's interesting. And I was like, oh, okay. But I did. A couple months later, I put out my first episode and it was a lot of fun. So I kept at it. And it turns out people did enjoy it. So now that's what I do full time.
And it's absolutely amazing. I remember when I was following your channel, it had like maybe a few 100,000, and within a matter of months, it just exploded, and you had people flocking to come watch your videos.
It's been nuts. I mean, it all kind of started from one episode. It was about 4 months into doing it, because I started right kind of when the pandemic was starting. So this was last June, and I did an episode on garum, which is an ancient Roman fish sauce. And when I put the episode out, I had around 5,000, somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 subscribers, which was more than I thought I would get in a year, let alone in 4 months. And by the end of that week, I passed 100,000, and it just kind of hasn't stopped since then. So something about fish sauce from ancient Rome really enticed people. I don't know exactly why, but yeah, it's been going gangbusters ever since.
So is that your favorite dish, or do you have a favorite dish?
Not at all. No, it is one of my favorite ingredients because it adds a really interesting flavor. So the way that it was used was kind of like the way that we would use salt now. The Romans didn't salt most of their foods. Salt is only mentioned a few times in Apicius, which is kind of the most complete cookbook from the time. But instead, this garum or liquamen is mentioned in almost every recipe, even some of the desserts, because it was their way of adding salt. But then it also adds this other flavor, kind of an umami flavor. It's not fishy at all. So it is a really interesting ingredient. That said, not even amongst my favorite ingredients, I don't think, but it has an interesting history. I think my favorite dish, gosh, it's always changing, but I really, really liked the hitvägg, or the 18th century version of a dish called semlor, which is from Sweden. Basically, it's like a really soft, buttery roll that's then filled with an egg and almond mixture with sugar, and then it's boiled in hot milk and served with the warm milk around it. So it's just a bit of soggy, bready almond goodness. I could have them every day.
That sounds so good. I actually had dinner not too long ago, and now I'm just hungry again.
Well, they're for dessert, so you could have one. So they take a long time to make. So
do you prefer baking or cooking?
Baking, hands down, not even a close competition. I started out baking. That was always what I enjoyed doing. I didn't really do much cooking until I started the show. And in those first few episodes, most of it was baking or something similar to it. Very, very simple things, because of pandemic, I couldn't get a lot of ingredients. So I was very limited to breads, because I had a bunch of flour. It was hard to find it, but I had a bunch of flour and yeast and stuff. So that's what I've always enjoyed. And I only started cooking because people were like, well, do a meat dish, do some sauces, do some other things. So I've been learning how to cook throughout this year. which has been a lot of fun.
Now, is there a celebrity that you'd love to cook with
Like a celebrity chef or just a celebrity in
in
general?
general?
I think, it actually honestly might be the same person, chef and just person in general, would be Thomas Keller. I think his love of ingredients and the process and his amazing ability to teach is something I think that I would really learn from. I have all of his cookbooks and I've made many things. Basically, he is one of the people that taught me how to bake simply from reading his Bouchon Bakery cookbook. That said, I do think it would be a lot of fun to cook with Liza Minnelli. I think she would be a hoot in the kitchen. I don't know what we would make, but I think that would be a lot of fun.
Oh, that would be.
Right? Just Liza. I don't know. I think it would be great. She does everything she does is fun.
So I know you worked at Disney before, but if you were pursuing a different path, what would you be doing and why would you be doing it?
I would be probably pursuing the path that I started out on, which was being a performer, acting on stage. That's what I loved to do. I'm sure that I would still love it if I did it still, but I kind of left that lifestyle. But I think that there's always a little bit of that kind of siren song pulling me back to performing. And honestly, tasting history is performing. I'm researching, I'm cooking, I'm writing, yes, but in essence, every week I do a mini performance for my camera. So I do still kind of scratch that itch, that performance bug. But I also think that I would have loved to have been a museum curator, worked in one of those historic museums, not necessarily like the Met or the something like that, but something more where it's a historical site that has kind of a museum built into it. And I love going to those kinds of places, like old castles or cathedrals and things like that. And I think that I would be very good at that.
Do you have a favorite period in history?
I do. It always kind of bounces around, but I always come back to the very, very end of the Anglo-Saxon period. So like 1050 to 1066, right before and during the conquest from the Normans. So fantastic, like dramatic, over the top, kind of soap opera-esque time period in England. And I don't think it gets much more interesting than that.
So speaking of time periods, we're now at the segment of the show we like to call Past, Present, and Future, where we're going to be exploring 3 different periods of your life. So how do you see yourself now? How does this compare to the person you were 5 years ago? And how do you think things will be for you in the next 5 years?
Gosh, how do I see myself now? Stressed? Is stressed a way to see yourself? I've kind of bit off more than I can chew sometimes, I think, though, I'm still chewing. Just really, really busy and kind of in a very transformational period in my life, giving up the security of having kind of a full-time corporate job, which was something that I sought out. That's one reason why I gave up performing. And so kind of going back to that, it's very scary, but I'm also incredibly happy right now because not just because of the channel, but because I have a wonderful fiance who he still works for Disney. So we still have that kind of that anchor, and he's so supportive of the channel and everything. So honestly, I'm living the best part of my life right now so far. So that's how I see myself. Extremely busy and stressed, but extremely happy as well. How do I see myself? What's the difference between this and 5 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
It's actually very similar in a way because it was about 5 years ago. I guess it was a little bit more than 5 years ago, but about 5 years ago is when I started at Disney, and I was giving up performing, which was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do because I felt like I was letting myself down. I felt like I was letting my family down because it was what I had been meant to do since I was 5 years old. And that's what I was going to do. And then to realize that it's not necessarily going to make you happy, and you want to quit. It's really hard. So that again was a very transformational time, and yet I was going into something that I was really enjoying. I really enjoyed working at Disney. I was proud to work at Disney, and it was the first time in my life that I knew where I was going to get money the next month from. So that was, it sounds horrible to say like, oh, that steady paycheck, but there is nothing more stressful than not knowing how you're going to eat. There were times when I was performing where I did have a good income, but there were also times where I was performing where I would take saltine crackers and jelly from the deli down the street because that's all I could afford. So it was a transformational period. I was very happy. So very different from today, but in a way it was like all kind of the same. But it was also the first time that I was able to get a stable place to live. It's the first time I've lived in a place more than a year, I think. And I got a cat. So it was a nice,
Aw.
like domesticated kind of lifestyle. And then 5 years from now, I have kind of learned that I have no idea, because if you had told me 5 years ago that I would be hosting a cooking show, I'd never even cooked before. I mean, come on, it's crazy. So who knows what I'll be doing in 5 years? Part of me just kind of wants to be semi-retired and puttering around in the garden and writing historical fiction for fun. But we'll see if Jose is able to support me in that endeavor.
So, speaking of which, what principles do you live your life by?
Um, a lot. But I think that number one is never do anything halfway. Just always do your best, no matter what you're doing. One of the best, I put everything I have into tasting history every single week. It's not always perfect. Well, it's never perfect because I'm putting one out each week. So there is that degree of, kind of, you have to keep up with production, but there's never been an episode where I wasn't at least proud enough of the product going out. Otherwise I wouldn't have put out an episode that week. But it doesn't necessarily have to even be what you do for work or what you have a passion for. One of the best compliments I ever got in my entire life actually wasn't given to me. It was given to my parents about me. I was a busboy at Ruth's Chris in Scottsdale in college. And my parents came to eat there. And I guess the manager went up and told them that I was the best busboy that they had ever had, and that I was like extremely calm and doing it and quick. And they said that it was like watching someone do Zen, like Tai Chi, but while wiping tables and, cleaning dishes. And that's kind of how my father especially taught me to do everything, was whether you're washing dishes or whether you're doing, something that you have a great passion for, do your best and never do a half-assed job. If I can say that. Sorry, my cat just jumped up on the table, wobbling around. It's not an earthquake. I do live in LA, but it's not an earthquake. So yeah, I think that's my core principle. Always do your best.
Yeah, that's definitely a great principle. And I imagine that must have played into your decision of whether you wanted to stay with Disney or whether you wanted to pursue your channel, because you wanted to give it your all, but only in like one sort of path.
Exactly. I really wanted to do both, but it came down to the fact, partly because if I had gone back to Disney and as I had been furloughed for a while, and if I had gone back and it had been the exact same job, I maybe could have done it. But the job had changed so much because movie theaters, the entire theatrical landscape of how movies are done has changed so much in the last 15 months that I would have had to learn the new job, and I couldn't devote my all to that and be doing tasting history. And I definitely wasn't going to be giving up tasting history or doing a, kind of a part-way job on that. So I had to decide, it's one or the other, and tasting history won.
Well, yeah, and we're really glad that you've continued to do tasting history, because you still put out these amazing videos week after week, and I can't wait to see the future content that you're going to have.
Me too. So I'm only ever a couple weeks away from not having a video ready. So I'm excited too to see what happens.
Now, I don't know if you can like disclose this or not, but have you ever like flubbed on a dish and like had to refilm?
Yeah, almost exclusively. Yeah, all the time. Well, part of the way that I have, and it wasn't done on purpose. It kind of just, I fell into it. Part of the way that the show is structured is I am not a professional chef. So when I do make mistakes, I just kind of embrace them for the most part and say, hey, you know what, this didn't work or whatever. That said, I often have to go through things multiple times, even just to get a serviceable dish, because one of the cool things about historic cooking is you almost never know if you are right or wrong, because who's to say? The recipes are so vague and things have changed that you don't know if it's right or wrong, and nobody else does either. Even if they say they do, nobody knows, because nobody was around in 1570 to tell you if, this pizza that you're making was the way that pizza was made then. But there have been a few times where I've pretty much finished at least the cooking part of the episode and have something, and I taste it or look at it or something, and it's just like, no, I gotta go back to the drawing board and figure out, clearly the recipe did not intend this. There's no way that it intended this, or, because sometimes the recipe will say, and then it's supposed to come out like this, and if it doesn't, I don't know. And a lot of times it's just because the recipes are very poorly written, but also it can be because ingredients are different now than they were then. Translations of certain things can be different now versus then. So there's a lot that can go wrong, but that's part of the fun of the channel. It's not meant to be taken too seriously. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be, hey, sometimes things turn out well. Hey, sometimes things don't. But here's the history behind it. And maybe this is why it didn't turn out well. So, yeah, that's how it goes.
It's so great that those people left those recipes over time, and we can still experience the joy of those things today. And so in sort of thinking about that, we're grateful to have those recipes. What would you say you're grateful for in your life?
My fiance, more than anything, he keeps me sane. He's made me a better person. He's one of the kindest, just most caring people that I've ever known. And that is something that I've always tried to work on, but actually living with someone who is that, it's kind of been like, oh, that's how you care about other people. So he's been really a good influence on me. And I'm thankful for almost everything in my life. I have a wonderful life. There's almost nothing that I would change, except perhaps to get a bigger kitchen. I'm not thankful for the size of my kitchen.
So we're on the segment of the show where we get our name. So if you were to leave something in a time capsule for people to dig up 100 years later, what would you put in there and why?
So I thought about this, and I wanted to give a really cool answer about something that's really meaningful or, indicative of this time period. But then I thought back to when I was in middle school, we opened a time capsule at school. It was not 100 years. I think it was 50 years. It was 50 years since the school had opened. So it was from the 1940s, showing my age. And there were things like newspapers and stuff like that in it, but I remember the most interesting things were a completely empty tube of toothpaste and a toy. It was like a red metal toy truck. And so that's what I would leave, are the mundane things that we take for granted, because all of the really important stuff that gets into the history books, that gets into museums. So I don't need to put that in a time capsule, especially for 100 years, maybe for like 1,000,000 years. But so yeah, some shaving cream, an electric toothbrush, because who knows what toothbrushes will be like in 100 years. And I don't know, a few other things, and maybe a good bottle of scotch or gin. Scotch, because that ages better. So, and that'll be a really nice surprise for whoever opens it up in 100 years. Bottle of wine, maybe.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with that.
Yeah.
All right, so is there anything else you'd like to add? Maybe some like final words that you'd like to leave with our viewers?
I can't think of anything. I mean, I think just watch Tasting History, especially if you love history. It's obviously very important to me. Not the show. I mean, it is, but history in general. No matter how you take it, whether you like to get your history through books or YouTube channels or something very serious like textbooks and documentaries and things like that, but just always be learning. Always be learning history, especially because we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. So
Absolutely. And where can people find you on social media?
So youtube.com/tastinghistory is definitely the best way to find the channel. And then on Instagram, I'm Tasting History with Max Miller, and on Twitter, Tasting History 1, just the number 1.
Awesome. And before we go, I know you had I think you have a cookbook coming out. Is it this summer?
It's a ways away. So I'm working on it right now. And the publication process is laborious and lengthy. So it's actually going to be out in about a year, a little over a year.
That's really exciting. And I'm guessing it's going to feature all the recipes that you've had on your YouTube channel.
It'll be some of the recipes from the show, and it'll be some new recipes that then I'll turn into episodes later down the line. So you will get new stuff if you get the cookbook. And it'll also have history in it, not just the recipes.
Awesome.
I just have a question about the cookbook. Are you going to feature the recipes in the original language, or like have the side-by-side English and let's say Latin or Greek?
So some of that's going to be up to the publisher. I'm definitely going to be having the not just my version of the recipe, but the translation of when there is a recipe of the actual recipe. And yeah, using the original language, if we can, I would love to do that. And depending on what it is, it makes it hard. Babylonian cuneiform is harder to include, and then there are some, there's some that we don't have the original text. We only have translations and stuff like that. So we'll see what they want.
Well, Max, thank you so much for being part of our time capsule. Thank you to our viewers for watching, and please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Tune in again next week for another amazing addition to our time capsule. See you next time.
Thank you for having me.